Hello there. Today we're going to talk about the leaders in set two and specifically how to beat all of them. Right? So these are going to be general strategies that when you're sitting down from a leader that you haven't played against, how are you going to go about beating them? And I'm going to start with Kira. She's one of the more complicated leaders in the set. And it's because her flip effect is so powerful. So on her leader side, she has an ability where she can deal 2 damage to a friendly unit and then give a shield token to it for 1. Uh, that can be good, especially with units with grit. But when she flips, she heals all damage from every unit in play, then deals damage to each unit equal to half its remaining hit points, rounded down. That can be nuts, especially when combined with other sources of direct damage like Bombing Run. I've played Kira Bombing Run a few times, and it is very, very fun, right? When she flips, she's doing a ton of damage, and Bombing Run can pretty much finish off most things on the field. If it does finish everything off, then you have left behind a 7 power unit with 1 health left, right? Because she has 4 damage to herself. Bombing Run hits her for another 3, assuming you target the ground, and she's basically 7-1, which is pretty fun. It's not quite a super laser blast, but it's 3 turns earlier than a super laser blast, and so it's really, really fun. Combine it with their sources of direct damage like Ruthless Raider or Supreme Leader Snoke or Make an Opening, and she can do some pretty fun things. So the key in my mind when playing against Kira is just to anticipate that flip turn. Know that this is coming. If you're playing against the red version, I would assume that they're holding Bombing Run. But also, your opponent might not choose to flip on 5. This ability is so powerful that trying to wait it out might not be the way to go because it is worth delaying to time this perfectly. So try to bait it out early and have a good recovery plan for when it does come. Up next, we have Hunter. I doubt anyone's going to play Hunter, if I'm being honest. I think my go-to strategy here is just defeat his unique units, and then you won't have a problem. He's kind of the Hera of the set. Can be fun, but yeah, kill his unique units, and he basically does nothing. Finn is another one that I think is more straightforward. I doubt he'll see a ton of play. There is a cool engine that he and Rose can do together, so if you just kill Rose, then you don't have to worry about the engine. Fennec is an interesting one. Fennec can give units that cost 4 or less ambush. On her leader side, she has to spend a resource to do it. So that's not great, right? So she's basically playing behind curve. So she can get really cool things out of consistent ambushes with things like Kanan, right? So Kanan's on attack is phenomenal, heals the base, he hits pretty hard. So paying 1 to do that for him is pretty good. But the fact that she would always be behind curve just means that if you stay on curve and she's behind curve, ambushing into your stuff, you're able to just play over the top of her, right? So her ambushing a Consortium Star Viper into your Razor Crest isn't going to help her. Her ambushing Kanan into your Poe isn't going to help her. And then when she flips, she gets to use the ability for free, but she's only a 4/4, so just kill her, and you really don't have to worry about too much there. So I think this one will be fairly straightforward. Bo-Katan, if I'm playing against Bo-Katan, my strategy is to keep the board small. There are a lot of Mandalorian abilities where the wider they get, the more units they get on the field, the stronger they're going to be. You see that with effects like the Darksaber, where when the wielder of the Darksaber attacks, you get to give an experience to each Mandalorian. The armor is another one where when you play her, you can give a shield up to 3 Mandalorians, right? If you let things get out of hand and you're just attacking base when you could be taking out units, Bo-Katan is going to get her damage in for free, and these other, global effects are going to start getting worse and worse. So my thought here is when she plays a unit, just kill it. Her leader ability, you have to attack with Mandalorians to use it. She's a pretty big body to get rid of, but that's my strategy going into this one. Rey is a little similar. Rey is kind of like Tarkin from the first set. She can, spend a resource to give an experience token to a unit with 2 or less power, which could be useful. So I expect to see a lot of, little units, maybe with raid or like the Concord Dawn interceptors here, right? It's a 1/4, but turns into a 3/4 when defending. So that's kind of cool. On her flipped side, when she's a unit, she's a 2/6 that restores 3. The restore 3 is cool, but the fact that she only hits you back for 2 when you attack into her, that basically deserves to be punished. So if you're playing against Rey, my strategy is just attack into her, take her out. You won't have to worry about the restore, and then she can pump up little things, but your top end's going to be bigger, and you'll be able to deal with her. Moff Gideon, in my mind, is kind of a swarmish type deck that doesn't have the top end of a Bo-Katan. I think he is fairly powerful, but you can see this coming from him, right? So his on his leader side, it takes an action to give a unit that costs 3 or less the +1 attack. So you cannot stack that with like an ambush unit. On his leader side, you can, but again, kind of like Rey, he's only a 3/6, so just attack into him. And if you attack into his units, the +1 overwhelm doesn't matter as much. The overwhelm doesn't matter at all if you're attacking into his units. So when you can trade, you probably should take out his little things, and again, you'll win the game when he only has little units left. Aphra is kind of an interesting one in that I'm not sure she has a consistent strategy yet. It's not like there's going to be one Aphra deck. You could see Aphra decks that are trying to pull up lots of extra tricks like Surprise Strike. You could see some that are trying to get, discard pile shenanigans going to play Palpatine's Return to, maybe get Vader for 5 resources, let's say, right? Because they have Bib Fortuna. So Palpatine's Return only costs 5. You could see how things could get pretty fun there. And so my thought is just make her flip before she wants to, right? The card she gets back is random. The earlier you make her flip, the fewer options she's going to have. And she might get back a card that's not even super useful. Jabba. Jabba is a very interesting one. The way his action works, you basically have to use a unit on the board to get his bounty to trigger, right? Because it's super slow, and if you play a guy that, let's say, ambushes in to trigger the bounty, sure, you could play a unit that costs 1, but that's not incredible, right? What you really the big payoff for something like Jabba is to attack and kill something that's on the field that you've already given the bounty to, so that you can play ahead of curve, right? So that when you're at 5 resources, you can play a 6 resource guy instead of a 5 resource guy. And then on his flip turn, it gets even more important for him, right? So if he does it right, he can play Devastator when he's at 7 resources, right? Because when he's on his leader side, he gives a bounty to something. If you kill it or capture it, then your next thing is going to cost 1 less. Then he can deploy. he can give that same unit a bounty, right? He gets his when deployed to capture something other than what he's targeting. And then if he can use what's on the field already to kill that unit, all of a sudden he can play Devastator for 7 resources instead of 10. So that can be huge, right? But it's super complicated to try to get to work. So basically, don't let him build a board that can take advantage of that bounty and let him play ahead of time. Keep the initiative and use your units before he's putting bounties on them, and he's going to kind of be on the back foot. The other thing to consider with him is maybe going second, just because there are some units where if he puts a bounty on your unit, he gets some bonuses. Hunter of the Haxion Brood is an example, right? So if you don't have a unit for him to put a bounty on, because you traded in the first turn or something like that, then Hunter of the Haxion Brood will not come in with a shield. And so playing around some of those units that have bonuses from having bounties can do you some favors. Okay, Han. Han is pretty fun. He can play units that cost 1 less, and he has to deal 2 damage to that unit. So he can always play ahead of curve, but his units are going to have less health than normal. So punish him for that, right? If Han runs into a Kira deck, that might be tough for him because she's probably going to have lots of things in it that do direct damage. But Han's unit ability does not even have a limit, right? So when he's on his leader side, he actually has to exhaust. When he's on his unit side, if you're on 5 resources, he could play 5 2-cost units that turn because they would each cost 1 if you can't kill him. So there's a couple of ways he can go, right? He can try to play a longer game and play ahead of curve, maybe ramp into some cool late game stuff. Or he can drop 5 2-cost units on his flip turn, and if you don't kill him, he can keep going, right? So I would beware the swarm here. Things like Mon Mothma turn into, a 1/1 search for a rebel, and that can start getting pretty dangerous when you combine it with things like Admiral Akbar. So punish that low health. If he's bringing out things that are exhausted and you can kill it, it may be worth it because he may be unleashing a pretty big swarm soon. Okay, with Bossk, you want to anticipate him playing a bounty, right? This is a little different than Jabba. Jabba, can put a bounty on one of your units. With Bossk, he has to actually play one, but you want to plan for it and plan for Jango to be in there, right? If he's playing green, he's probably trying to ambush Jango. And you can kind of play around the upgrade bounties, right? So if they're putting bounties on your units with like the client or something like that, that's a little harder to deal with. But even bouncing your own units with things like evacuate or waylay will get rid of the bounty, which makes Bossk's ability not be able to hit them. And if you do have a bunch of units with bounties, I would try to get them killed maybe before the flip turn, or run into Bossk so that he can't just go nuts on his flip turn. Kylo. Kylo's a little predictable, especially on his leader side, right? So he's going to exhaust, discard a card from his hand to give something +2/+2. So the first thing is if you see Migs out there, kill him, right? Because you're taking direct damage to base. That's no good. You can kind of bait this a little bit, right? So if it's not Migs, where you're not going to take direct damage, and you think something is coming, but you have a kill already, you can let Kylo burn the card just to get him at more of a disadvantage and then take out the unit. Now, it may be riskier because then you face a bigger Kylo Ren on the flip turn. And so there's a little bit of a balancing act there, right? Do you want a bigger Kylo Ren with fewer options? Or would you rather just kill the unit right away so that Kylo's, a 2-4 when he deploys instead of a 5-4? Both can be good options. But either way, denying the damage from the pump is the way to go. Okay. Lando is obviously going to play super low to the ground, right? His plan is to try to get Zori or the Falcon out. Zori, when he... either way, he's going to try to get to his leader side, right? Instead of getting Zori out at 3. But what's your plan when the Falcon's going to come out as a 5-5 on 4? That's pretty big, right? And so if Power of the Dark Side is your plan, great. But you need a plan. I would assume that both of these cards are going to be in that deck. And the interesting thing about Lando is, defeating a resource sounds bad, but he's not going to run out of cards all that much because he's replacing the smuggling cards with cards from the top of his deck that are probably also smuggle cards, right? Most cards in the deck are going to smuggle. So have a plan for that. Okay. Cad Bane is another one where you might want to go second, right? Whenever he plays an Underworld card, he gets to do some indirect damage where you have to deal a damage to one of your units. 2 damage if he's on his leader side. So it's probably worth it to trade units before you're going to lose them to that indirect damage. And it can also be worth it to go second, right? This is another one where, kind of like Jabba, Cad Bane might be able, let's say Greedo is your only card. Playing Greedo and then it being Cad's turn is not going to be a good turn for you. So if you win, the initiative roll, you can defer, make your opponent go first, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. He has a pretty big body with 8 health, but again, hitting for 2, it's kind of like Rey. You can just attack into him, burn him down, and then prevent some of that damage. I think he'll be a strong one. I'm not sure how much we'll see him, just because Boba Fett seems still stronger than Cad, but I think he'll be pretty strong if folks are choosing to play him instead of Boba. Okay, Mando. There are multiple ways to punish upgrades, right? So bouncing does it with all the yellow tricks. Removal does it with things like Power of the Dark Side, takedown, stuff like that. And I think you've got to take advantage of that against the Mandalorian. He's going to be playing some upgrades, and you need to get some 2-for-1 value, where one of your cards is basically destroying 2 of his, and that's a good game plan. And the Mandalorian unit itself, when he deploys, is probably gonna get pretty upgraded. So if you've got plans that have worked well against Chirrut, that was not takedown, they'll probably work pretty well against the Mandalorian. We're starting to get into some tougher ones here. I think Gar Saxon is pretty well-rounded. He's kind of like the Krennic of this set in my mind. But he's quite a bit tougher to deal with, right? Krennic at a 2-7, you could just kind of take him out. Gar is big, and he makes all of your units better. Whether you're putting upgrades on them or whether they have experience or shields, they're hitting harder. And his unit side kind of negates what I just said, right? So a lot of times against upgrade heavy decks, you're trying to get a 2-for-1 where one of your cards is dealing with 2 of theirs. But if he gets to get the upgrade back, it's not quite as good for you, right? So you need to find ways to punish the units with upgrades, or to just go under, right? If you can take out do enough damage that you can just finish the game, and it doesn't matter how many big upgraded units he has, then you're in good shape. Another way to do it is just to take out the units before he can play upgrades on them, right? So if they're going more to the shielded route, that can be harder. But we have cards like Make an Opening that deal with the 7th Fleet Defenders and the Cantina Braggarts and stuff like that. Those will still be good against Gar Saxon. Hondo's another one that's fairly well-rounded, right? It's like Tarkin, but probably stronger because there's no resource cost to this. If I'm playing against Hondo, I'm expecting timely intervention, right? Everything is an ambush target because it comes out even stronger. It's like a draw card and a get a resource for playing a couple under curve. I don't think that's going to be a big problem for Hondo. Scanning Officer is your friend. I think if you're playing green, Scanning Officer is probably a great sideboard card, and it's pretty big, right? Because if it hits resources, the new resources come into play exhausted. So you can just shut down turns. And against Hondo, you can pretty much bet that there's going to be a bunch of smuggle in that resource row. So I think Hondo will be fun. I think he's actually going to be pretty strong. Another thing to keep in mind about Hondo is, hand size is kind of irrelevant, right? Sometimes it's important to know, like, okay, how many cards does my opponent have? Only one. They probably have pretty limited options. Against Hondo, I don't think that's the case. He probably has 5 or 6 options, even if he only has one card in hand. Boba's another one that is pretty well-rounded, right? There's a lot of these kind of Krennic-ish leaders. He takes units that are already pretty good, and he makes them stronger. So I would expect to be up against ambush and smuggle units if I'm playing against Boba Fett. Expect tricks. Now, they are still unit-based tricks, right? So anytime that you're playing units, it's kind of a fair game. It's not like against the heavy control vigilance decks. So you should have some game into Boba Fett. But I think he'll be pretty strong. And that's what I've got for you. I hope that was helpful. If there are strategies that you've seen that I didn't talk about, where you've noticed one is particularly good against a certain leader, feel free to let me know in the comments. Take care.